Again, scrolling down just so Mr. Ozovsky can see the report as it progresses through, but stopping there, please, Mr. Clerk. Again, we have a bluff, a bottom line up front description under the same type of heading, intelligence landscape. And again, for this report, it says that at 8:30 in the morning on February 14th, and I'll quote, the overall threat to CBSA officers and infrastructure remains low. And do you see that, Mr. Ozovsky?
I do.
And can you agree with me again, so that we don't have to go through them all, and perhaps subject to check if you do want to, that had been the report given in all of these reports throughout February?
Correct.
Okay. And Mr. Clerk, if you could next call up SSM CAN 406200. And I think we'll see that as you described it earlier, a wide distribution email with similar situational information. And if you could just scroll through it, Mr. Clerk, we're looking for page 4, bottom of page 4. Again, tables and statistics about activity at the various border points, and then we get the intelligence landscape bluff. And I'm sorry, you know what I forgot to do was to get the date and time of this. Mr. Clerk, could you go up to the top, please? Thanks. So we are now the next day. So this is February 15th. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I just wanted to make sure we understood this. So this is the next day's report of the same type. And when we look at the intelligence landscape bottom line up front, we see the same word about, same words about the threat being low, but there's some more words. But caution should be exercised in light of recent reporting surrounding IMVE groups. And do you know why that appeared on February 15th, the day after the invocation of the Emergencies Act?
Not specifically, no, but I can say in general, when events like this happen, one of the things that as a national security, part of the national security apparatus is that you're always concerned that that might tilt somebody from just being an online sort of person thinking about this type of thing that actually moves to action and does something. And that actually happened later on after this on February 17th. I can describe an event where something like that potentially happened.
And you see that below the sentence we were just talking about, IMVE groups, we have a repeat of the observation that the protests at POEs have caused significant operational impact that may result in a threat to Canada's economic security and prosperity. The one we saw last time in the other report, correct?
I see that, yes.
Now your explanation, as I understood it earlier, for the appearance at the end of the day on February 14th in one type of report, and then in the next day on February 15th in the other type of report, for the appearance of these references in the intelligence landscape description of the threat to CBSA officers and infrastructure, this sudden appearance of references to a threat to Canada's economic security and prosperity as being not motivated, in your view, by an effort on the part of the drafters of these reports to repeat the government explanation for invoking the Emergencies Act. You're confident of that?
I believe that to be true.
Yeah. And I think you'll agree that a threat assessment is meant to be a guide to action and policy, not to serve as a vehicle to rationalize it, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, if your personnel get the idea that the content of these threat assessments that they are getting are driven by an attempt to repeat government talking points, it's going to dilute the utility of those assessments to your personnel and to their ability to protect Canadians.
I don't disagree with that.
Okay. So it's important that the explanation you gave, that is that it was more or less a coincidence that this language appeared immediately after the invocation of the Emergencies Act, that it was just a coincidence and not an attempt to repeat the government's talking points for the invocation of the Act.
I believe that to be true, yes.
Thank you. Another point that chronologically, because we're at the end of the process here, chronologically at the invocation of the Act, you mentioned that the only impact, you mentioned in answer to questions by my colleague, Ms. Hine, that the only input that CBSA gave to Cabinet when it was considering how provisions in the Emergencies Act could assist CBSA's mandate was to observe that you didn't currently have the authority to prohibit entry on the grounds that people were heading to one of these protests, and that would be useful to you in terms of the objectives that Cabinet appeared to be trying to achieve. Do you remember that evidence?
Yes.
And if we can call up Mr. Clerk, SSM NSC CAN 50405. This is IRG minutes for February 20th. Do you recall participating in IRG meetings, Mr. Rozovsky?
I did, yes.
And Mr. Clerk, if we scroll down to page 6 at the bottom of the page, so just slow down a little bit, Mr. Clerk, so we can get the context here. Can you go up just a bit? So this is the IRG reporting on progress and with respect to actions that have taken place consequential on the invocation of the Emergencies Act. And then we have some input from CBSA at the very bottom. And Mr. Rozovsky, did you provide that input to the IRG?
I believe so, yes.
And did you participate in person or virtually in this meeting?
It was all virtual.
And for your virtual participation, was this you speaking, or had you submitted a report to this effect?
It was probably me reporting this.
And you would have been briefed in advance, I suppose, even for the president of CBSA, an appearance at the IRG is a significant event. You'd have had your staff brief you on this input.
Yes. So February 19th, there was an event in Prescott where 2 people were turned back using the emergency management regulations.
Sorry, can you just slow down a little bit and repeat that?
So on February 19th, in Prescott, at the Prescott Port of Entry, 2 individuals, 2 foreign nationals, attempting to come into the country for the purpose of participating in the protest, who were otherwise not prohibited from entry, were turned back using the EMR powers. And that's what that refers to.
Right. And had you made any other reports to the IRG about similar instances in which the Emergencies Act powers had been used by CBSA?
That was the first time I reported on that, I believe.
And I think it was the last time also?
Yes.
Okay. And so as far as CBSA is aware, the authority in the Emergencies Act that empowered CBSA to deny entry to people was with respect to a couple who were turned away on February 19th?
That's correct.
And that's the totality of it?
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.